She had no memory of the tattoo on her wrist or the man whose name was permanently inked there in a language she couldn't read. When her new employer saw it, he recognized it instantly. He knew exactly who she was, even though she had forgotten everything. This is not a love story. It is a medical mystery rooted in one of psychiatry's most contested and terrifying conditions, dissociative amnesia. Her name is Jessica, a young woman found with no past, working a job she doesn't remember applying for. This is the terrifying reality of dissociative amnesia, a condition that erases identity but leaves the body as a map of forgotten clues. The tattoo is a permanent message from a life she can't recall, written in Korean script only one man in this house can read. But here is the central, chilling question. What do you do when the only person who knows who you are is the person who may have made you forget in the first place? You must understand the sheer scale of her memory loss. Dissociative amnesia doesn't just erase a weekend or a name, it can obliterate decades. When Jessica was found 3 months ago wandering near the docks of Incheon with no identification, she was a psychiatric blank slate. Medical reports noted she could speak fluent English and basic Korean, could operate a smartphone and understood social norms, but she could not recall her own birthday, her family, or how she arrived in South Korea. This is called a fugue state, and according to the Cleveland Clinic, it is often triggered by severe psychological trauma. The brain, overloaded, simply hits delete to survive. She was placed in a state-funded halfway house, assigned a caseworker, and after showing no signs of violent behavior was cleared for supervised employment. The job at the Kang estate came through a temp agency that didn't ask questions. The work was simple: dusting, laundry, maintaining the silent grandeur of a home owned by one of Seoul's most reclusive tech billionaires, Min Kang. He was 34, a ghost in his own machine, having built a data analytics empire from nothing and then withdrawing from public life entirely. His staff was small, vetted, and rotated frequently. Jessica was just another face. But here's the first twist in the memory maze. On her third day while serving tea, Min Kang's eyes locked not on her face but on her wrist. The tattoo, 3 elegant Korean characters, was partially visible below her cuff. His reaction was not shock but a chilling, slow recognition. He didn't ask her about it. He didn't say a word. He just stared, and in that silence the entire power dynamic of the house shifted. He knew something she did not. And in the world of amnesia, knowledge is absolute power. The human brain in a fugue state is a fortress with no doors. Neurologists explain that while procedural memory, how to walk, talk, tie a shoe, remains intact, episodic memory, the story of you, is completely inaccessible. Jessica could brew tea perfectly, but she had no memory of ever learning. She could feel a sense of dread in certain rooms of the estate but couldn't say why. This is the haunting reality. The body remembers what the mind cannot. The tattoo was a physical scar of a past her consciousness had rejected. Min Kang began to alter her duties. She was moved from general cleaning to personal attendance, serving him directly in his private study. He would ask subtle, probing questions. Do you like jazz, Jessica? Does the smell of pine incense feel familiar? He was testing, trying to trigger recall, but every attempt failed. Her caseworker, a man named Park, visited weekly and noted Jessica's increased anxiety but attributed it to the stress of a new job. He had 40 other clients. He missed the signs. Then 2 weeks in, Min made his move. He called her into his study late at night, a violation of protocol. The room was all dark wood and blue light from a wall of server monitors. He did not offer her a seat. He simply pointed to her wrist and said, "Show me the tattoo." When she extended her arm, he took her wrist in his hand. His grip was firm, clinical, and traced the characters with his thumb. "You don't know what this says, do you?" Jessica shook her head, a cold fear spreading through her. "It says Min," he said quietly. "It is my name." Room seemed to tilt. Why would a woman with no memory have her employer's name permanently inked on her body? The implications were horrifying. Was she a stalker, a discarded lover, a victim? Min released her wrist, his expression unreadable. "You will not speak of this to your caseworker. You will not ask questions. You will continue your work." It was not a request. It was an order that leveraged her total dependency. She needed the job to stay out of state care. He knew it. But the mystery deepens with a disturbing pattern. Research into dissociative amnesia shows that recovery, when it happens, is often triggered by returning to physical locations or encountering key objects from the lost past. The estate itself began to act as a trigger. Jessica would experience flashbacks, not full memories but sensory fragments. The smell of a particular brand of leather polish would bring a wave of nausea. The sound of a specific classical piece, Saint Saëns, The Swan, would cause her hands to shake uncontrollably. These were somatic memories trapped in her nervous system trying to break through. Min watched these episodes with the intensity of a scientist observing an experiment. He started leaving objects around her quarters, a scarf of a specific silk pattern, a photograph of a garden she didn't recognize. He was curating her environment, deliberately trying to steer her memory recovery. Why? What was he trying to make her remember? Or perhaps, what was he trying to make her forget forever? The pressure built to a breaking point. Jessica, in a moment of desperation, used the estate's computer during her cleaning time to search the Korean National Missing Persons database. She had no photo to search, but she used her own description: black female, mid-20s, distinctive tattoo on left wrist. The search returned one result, archived 2 years prior. The file was sealed, marked with a high-level security flag that required a government or law enforcement login to access. The case was not closed, it was suppressed. That night, Min Jun summoned her again. He had the search history log printed out on his desk. He didn't yell, he simply said, "You are digging in grave that should stay buried. You want to know who you were? You were nothing, a problem. I am giving you a chance to be something else." Then he delivered the line that would change everything. "The tattoo isn't just my name, Jessica, it's a mark of ownership, and you asked me to put it there." The statement hung in the air, a paradox that defied all logic. How could a person with no memory verify such a claim? It was the ultimate gaslighting in a situation where the victim has no internal compass. But then Min Jun did something unexpected. He opened a drawer and slid a single photograph across the desk. It showed a younger him and a woman who was undeniably Jessica, smiling at a cafe in what looked like Paris. They looked intimate, happy. The date stamp was 3 years ago. The cliffhanger is not the photo itself, it's the neurological impossibility it presents. If Jessica has been in a dissociative fugue for only 3 months, how does she have no memory of a relationship from 3 years ago? Fugue states don't erase a lifetime. They typically erase days, weeks, sometimes years, but not in such a clean, selective cut, unless the amnesia isn't organic, unless it was induced. And as the leading psychiatric journal published just last year stated, in a quarter of reviewed dissociative amnesia cases, no psychological trauma was reported to explain the memory loss. The implication is chilling. Sometimes the mind isn't protecting you from a past trauma, it's being protected from one. Jessica is not just a maid with amnesia. She's a locked room and Min Jun Kang holds the only key. But what if the key doesn't open the door? What if it was designed to keep it sealed shut forever? The photograph proves a past, but it tells us nothing of the violence that might have ended it. And now the man who owns her name on her skin, owns the estate she can't leave, and owns the proof of their past, is waiting for her to remember. Or is he waiting for her to finally, completely forget? The photograph didn't bring memory, it brought terror. Because the neuroscience is clear, in true dissociative amnesia, even when presented with direct evidence of the past, the memory pathways remain blocked. The photo was a fact without context, a history without a story. Jessica spent that night in her quarters, running her fingers over the tattoo, trying to feel a connection to the smiling woman in Paris. She felt nothing, but her body remembered. Her heart rate spiked, her palms sweat. Her autonomic nervous system was screaming a warning her conscious mind couldn't understand. This is the cruel duality of the condition. The brain's amygdala, the fear center, can retain traumatic memories even when the hippocampus, which forms explicit memories, goes offline. Jessica was living in a state of constant, unexplained dread, and Min Jun Kang was the source of every cue. He began a new phase of psychological conditioning. Her duties were further restricted to the east wing of the estate, an area filled with European art and specific scents, lavender, old paper, a particular brand of French soap. He was engaging in what psychiatrists call exposure therapy, but without consent and without a therapeutic goal. He was trying to manually rebuild her memory, brick by traumatic brick. The ethical violation was staggering. He was treating a human being as a broken machine to be reprogrammed. But Jessica was not entirely powerless. The human mind under siege does not break cleanly, it finds cracks. She began experiencing intense, vivid dreams, not of Parisian cafes but of cold metal, the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a voice, a woman's voice speaking rapid, angry Korean. She would wake with fragments of sentences. "You don't own me. The contract is void." These were not memories of love, they were memories of conflict. She started a secret journal, writing down every dream fragment, every physical reaction. She noted that Min Jun never touched her except to examine the tattoo. He never made an advance. His obsession was clinical, not romantic. This reframed everything. If they were lovers, where was the intimacy? Where was the grief for her lost self? His behavior matched that of a handler, not a partner. The breaking point came from an external audit. The temp agency, as part of a routine compliance check, requested an update on Jessica's work permit and residential status. Min Jun's lawyer provided documents showing she was a private domestic employee under special visa sponsorship. But when the agency clerk ran the passport number on the forms, it flagged an anomaly. The number was valid, but it was registered to a different name, Jae-yoon Choi. And that person had been declared deceased 2 years ago in a boating accident off Jeju Island. This was the pivot. The photograph was a truth, but it was a piece of a much darker puzzle. Jessica was not just a missing person, she was a dead person. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase Jae-yoon Choi and create Jessica, the amnesiac maid. And Min Jun Kang had placed her in his home under this fabricated identity. Driven by this discovery, Jessica staged a crisis. During her next session with caseworker Park, she intentionally triggered a panic attack by focusing on the scent of Min Jun's soap, which he had been using in her presence. As she hyperventilated, Park, alarmed, demanded to know what was happening. Through gasps, she said the only thing she knew might get her out. "He's trying to make me remember. The tattoo is his name. I think he's afraid of what I'll remember." Park was a bureaucrat, but he was not corrupt. He filed a mandatory report to the Seoul Metropolitan Health Department, citing concerns of potential coercion and psychological abuse of a vulnerable adult under state guardianship. This report created a paper trail that Min Jun's influence could not immediately vanish. It also triggered a welfare check by a different agency, scheduled for 48 hours later. Min Jun was alerted, of course. The system is porous to men of his resources. That evening he did not summon her. He came to her room. For the first time, his calm facade cracked. He wasn't angry, he was desperate. "They are coming to take you away," he said. "And if they do, you will never be safe. The people who hurt you, who did this to your mind, they are still out there. I have been protecting you." It was a masterful manipulation, leveraging her deepest fear, the unknown. But was it a lie? The existence of the fabricated identity proved someone had the means and motive to make her disappear. Was Min Jun her jailer or her guardian? He presented new evidence, a security hard drive. He played a CCTV clip on a tablet. It showed a luxury apartment hallway. A woman, Jaeyoon Choi, Jessica's double, is arguing with a tall European man in a suit. The audio is clear. The man says, "The deal is off. You know too much. They want you erased." Jaeyoon replies, "Tell Kang Min Jun he doesn't own my silence." Then the clip ends. Min Jun paused the video. "That man is a corporate intelligence operative, a cleaner. The next clip from that camera is blank. You disappeared that night. I found you 6 months later in Incheon, half drowned and with no memory. I believe they tried to kill you and failed. I created Jessica to hide you in plain sight." This was the major pivot. The narrative flipped from potential perpetrator to potential savior. The estate wasn't a prison, it was a witness protection program engineered by a billionaire with the resources to do it. The tattoo, he claimed, was her idea, a failsafe. She told him, "If I ever forget, if they ever try to take me again, mark me as yours, so you'll always know and I'll always find my way back." It was a gothic, romantic, and utterly plausible explanation for the inexplicable ink. But trust in the amnesiac mind is a fragile currency. Jessica had only his word and a curated video clip. The system, however, was now in motion. The welfare check arrived the next morning, 2 officials, one from health, one from immigration. Min Jun was courteous, compliant. He presented the forged Jessica documents perfectly. He explained her anxiety as part of her recovery, praising her progress. He offered to show them her comfortable quarters. It was a performance designed to pass inspection. But Jessica in that moment made a choice. As the officials turned to leave, she lifted her wrist, pulled back her cuff, and showed them the tattoo. "Do you know what this says?" she asked the immigration officer, her voice steady. The officer, a middle-aged woman, peered at it. "It says Min Jun," she said, confused. Jessica then looked directly at Min Jun and asked a question she had never dared voice. "If you were protecting me, why have you never let me see a doctor, a real neurologist? Why is my treatment just you and this house?" The room froze. Min Jun's mask of concern solidified into something cold. The officials exchanged a look. Protocol was clear. A vulnerable adult expressing fear of their caregiver and requesting independent medical assessment required immediate action. They couldn't leave her there. Min Jun argued, his voice low and threatening, about legal ramifications, but the health official had seen too many cases of domestic imprisonment masked as care. She invoked emergency protective custody. Jessica would be taken to a public hospital for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Min Jun did not resist physically. He simply looked at Jessica as they led her out and said, in a voice only she could hear, "You have no idea what you've just unlocked." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, heavy with a dread she couldn't comprehend. At Seoul National University Hospital, the walls were white and the protocols were rigid. For the first time in months, Jessica was beyond Min Jun's direct influence. A neurologist, Dr. Lee, ordered a full battery of tests: fMRI to look for brain lesions, blood panels for toxins, and a structured interview by a specialist in dissociative disorders. This was the objective truth she had been seeking, but the first result was not about her mind, it was about her body. The toxicology screen came back positive for trace amounts of a pharmaceutical agent called midazolam, a potent amnesia-inducing drug used in surgical anesthesia. The half-life is short, but metabolites can linger in hair follicles for months. Jessica's hair sample showed intermittent exposure over a period of at least 2 years. The diagnosis shifted from purely psychological dissociative amnesia to chemically facilitated memory suppression. Someone had been drugging her repeatedly to keep her in a state of confusion and malleability. The timeline was catastrophic. It meant her memory loss wasn't a single traumatic event 3 months ago. It was an ongoing project, and the only constant presence in her life for the last 6 months had been Min Jun Kang. Bridge to Act 2B is not a question of memory, but of motive. If Min Jun was her protector, why would he continue to drug her? If he was her jailer, what secret was so devastating that it required years of chemical imprisonment? And now, with Jessica in the hands of authorities and a dangerous truth beginning to surface, the other players, the European man from the video, the people who wanted Jae-yoon Choi erased, are about to re-enter the game. The estate was a controlled environment. The hospital is a fishbowl, and the predators are circling. The drugs changed everything. This was not protection, it was maintenance. Dr. Lee sat Jessica down in a secure consultation room, her toxicology report between them like an indictment. Midazolam induces anterograde amnesia. It prevents the formation of new memories, but given intermittently over a long period, it can cause profound disorientation and retrograde memory loss. It creates a perfect, chemically induced fugue state. Jessica asked the only question that mattered. Could someone function? Could they hold a job, follow instructions? Dr. Lee nodded grimly. With careful dosing, yes. You would be compliant, suggestible, and have no continuous narrative of your life. You would be a ghost. This was the wait it gets worse moment. Min-jun wasn't just hiding her, he was actively keeping her in a mental cage. The romantic story of the tattoo as a failsafe dissolved. A new, horrifying theory emerged. The tattoo wasn't a message of love, but a brand of ownership applied to a person who had been chemically subdued. It was a receipt. The hospital, however, was not a sanctuary. On her second night, a nurse named Jaewon, who had been unusually kind, slipped Jessica a note during her vitals check. It read, "Your caseworker Park is missing. Do not trust the police. They are paid." The note disappeared into the nurse's pocket as quickly as it came. The system Min-jun had warned her about wasn't a shadowy them. It was embedded in the very institutions meant to protect her. This triggered a strategic panic in Jessica. She knew her 72-hour hold was a clock ticking down. Once evaluated, she would be released either back to state care, which was compromised, or potentially into Min-jun's custody if he leveraged his legal resources. She had to use the hospital's resources now. During a supervised computer session for therapeutic journaling, she hacked her own search. Instead of missing persons, she searched the corporate registry for Kang Min-jun. The results were a labyrinth of holding companies, but one name kept appearing in cross-shareholdings: Choi Global. The connection was electric: Choi Jae-yoon Choi. She searched Choi Global scandal. The headlines from 3 years ago were cryptic but damning. Biotech partner accuses Choi Global of intellectual property theft. Whistleblower vanishes ahead of tribunal. The articles mentioned a joint venture between Choi Global and Min-jun's data firm Kang Solutions, aimed at developing predictive neural interface technology. The project was codenamed Project Mnemosyne, after the Greek goddess of memory. The whistleblower was never named. The pieces began to form a monstrous picture. What if Jae-yoon Choi wasn't a random victim? What if she was the whistleblower? What if she had evidence of theft or worse, unethical human testing? Her erasure wasn't just about silence, it was about burying evidence inside a living person whose mind had been wiped clean. The tattoo wasn't Min-jun's name, it was a corporate logo, a signature on a human asset. Dr. Lee, to his credit, grew suspicious of the outside interest in his patient. He found his computer access temporarily restricted. A hospital administrator suggested Jessica's case was complex and might be better handled by a private clinic. The pressure was being applied. That's when Jessica made her move. She confessed everything to Dr. Lee: the tattoo, the curated environment, the CCTV video, and now the corporate link. She begged for one test: a deep brain MRI focused on the hippocampus and amygdala, looking for signs of physical intervention beyond drugs. Dr. Lee, ethically bound and now personally invested, fast-tracked the procedure. The results arrived as her hold period expired. The MRI showed microscopic scarring in the hippocampus, consistent with targeted non-invasive ultrasonic therapy, an experimental procedure known to suppress specific memory engrams. It was sometimes called memory editing. The timeline of the scarring suggested it was done roughly 2 years ago, around the time Jae-yoon Choi disappeared. This was no accident. This was a precision erasure. As Dr. Lee was explaining this, 2 uniformed police officers arrived at the ward with a court order. Jessica was being released into the temporary guardianship of Kang Min-jun pending a full custody hearing. The order cited her fragile mental state and need for a stable, familiar environment. Min-jun's legal team had moved with devastating speed and influence. Dr. Lee protested, but the order was valid. The system had flexed, and it had chosen power. Jessica was escorted out. Min-jun was waiting in the lobby, not with triumph, but with a weary resignation. He didn't speak as they drove back to the estate. The silence was heavier than any threat. Once inside the gates, he led her not to her quarters, but to the underground level she never knew existed. It was not a dungeon. It was a state-of-the-art medical lab, complete with a neural imaging suite and a pharmacy locker. Here was the physical proof. He had the means to drug her and study her. But then he did the unexpected. He unlocked a secure server terminal and entered a lengthy password. "You want your memory back," he said, his voice hollow. "Here it is, the unedited feed from Project Mnemosyne." He played a video. It showed a younger Jae-yoon Choi, vibrant and sharp in this very lab. She was speaking to the camera. Log entry 7. The ethical breach is undeniable. Kang is using the cognitive data from our participants to develop behavioral influence models for a private military contractor. I have copied the data drives. He knows. I've told him I'm taking it to the authorities. The next clip showed a violent argument between Jae-yoon and Min-jun. He was pleading. They will kill you for this, not me, them, the partners. Give me the drives and I can protect you. She refused. The video ended. Min-jun turned to Jessica. The European in the hallway video worked for those partners. They didn't want you dead. They wanted you erased and the data in your brain scrubbed. I made a deal. I would deliver a blank slate, a living woman with no memory of the data or the theft. In return, they wouldn't hunt you. The tattoo was their idea, a mark that the asset had been processed and was under my control. I have been keeping you here not to imprison you, but to maintain the illusion that the erasure was permanent. If they ever suspected you were remembering, they would finish the job. This was the second-order consequence, the it gets even bigger moment. The villain wasn't just Min-jun, it was a consortium of private interests engaged in illegal neurotechnology. Jessica wasn't a lover or a stalker, she was a smuggler. Her mind wasn't a prison, it was a vault, and the combination was her lost memory. Min-jun, in this version, was a flawed guardian who chose a horrific form of protection over certain death. But could she believe him? The lab proved his capability for deception, yet the raw fear in the video seemed real. That night, left alone in her old room, Jessica found a single new object on her dresser. It was a small encrypted solid-state drive, the kind used in high-security data transfer. Attached was a note in Min-jun's handwriting, the last copy, what you died for, remember. The transition to Act 3 is not about recovering a past life, but about weaponizing it. Jessica holds in her hand the very data that caused her destruction. The men who wanted it erased are undoubtedly monitoring the situation. Min-jun has just handed her the keys to her own prison, or perhaps the detonator for his entire world. The final act is not a search for identity. It is a choice. Does she destroy the drive to secure a peaceful, empty future, or does she plug it in and remember everything, the truth, the betrayal, and the violence, knowing it will summon the wolves to her door one final time? The ghost must decide if she wants to be a person again, no matter the cost. The drive felt heavier than any object she had ever held. In her hand was not just data, but the restored consciousness of Jae-yoon Choi. To access it was to annihilate Jessica, the amnesiac Maid, forever. But the alternative was to live as a ghost in a haunted house, forever wondering what was worth dying for. That night, with the estate silent, she plugged the drive into a secure port on Min-jun's own terminal, using passwords he had left in plain sight. He wanted her to remember. This was his confession and his surrender. The data unlocked in cascading files, but it wasn't just documents. It was a neural backup, an experimental technology from Project Mnemosine. The system prompted, memory reconstruction, YN. She clicked yes. What followed was not a slow trickle, but a flood. The partition in her mind, built by drugs and ultrasound, shattered. She remembered everything. She was Jae-yoon Choi, lead neuroethicist for Choi Global. She discovered the project's true aim, not just predicting behavior, but implanting false memories in test subjects to alter their core identities for corporate and state clients. It was psychological warfare disguised as therapy. She had gathered evidence. She also remembered her relationship with Min-jun. They were not lovers, they were accomplices. He was the tech architect, she was the conscience. They had been secretly working together to expose the project from within. The night she disappeared, they had planned to leak the data together. But the partners, a consortium of European security contractors, moved first. They kidnapped her. The erasure wasn't a deal Min-jun made to save her, it was their punishment. They forced him to use his own technology on her to make him personally destroy the mind of the woman he admired. The tattoo was their sick receipt, proof the job was done. Min-jun's guilt had been his prison for 2 years. His entire protection was a penance. But the final memory was the most devastating. In the lab, just before the ultrasonic procedure, she had looked at Min-jun, who was being forced to operate the machine. She had whispered a code phrase, a mnemonic trigger they had designed as a failsafe, remember the swan. It was the key to bypass the memory block buried deep in her subconscious. He had heard her. He had spent 2 years trying to reverse his own work, using the estate as a recovery lab, using the drugs not to maintain her amnesia, but to stabilize her brain as he attempted a painfully slow, clandestine recovery. Every test, every triggered sensation was a targeted attempt to activate that failsafe. He wasn't her jailer. He was a doctor performing brain surgery without a scalpel, trying to undo a crime he was forced to commit. With her memory restored, Jae-yoon understood the scale of the conspiracy. The partners had politicians, police, and judges in their pocket. Her return to the public system would have been a death sentence. Min-jun's extreme control was the only reason she was alive. But now, with her mind whole, the data in her possession, and the partners undoubtedly monitoring the estate's network for the very access she just performed, the clock had run out. Alarms triggered silently. Min-jun entered the lab, his face pale. They know, he said. The drive was tagged. They're coming. He didn't apologize, he didn't explain, he simply handed her a gun. "You have the evidence, you have your mind, now choose, run or burn it all down with me." Jae-yoon made her choice. She didn't run. She uploaded the entire data dump not to the authorities, but to every major news outlet and whistleblower platform she had pre-selected 3 years ago, using a dead man switch protocol she had buried in her own mind. The truth of Project Mnemosony, the names of the partners, the corrupted officials, and the evidence of forced human experimentation went live at midnight Seoul time. The partners arrived not as shadows but as a private security team breaching the estate. A firefight erupted in the halls. Min-jun, moving with a lethal precision she never guessed he possessed, held them off, buying seconds for the upload to complete. In the chaos, Jae-yoon confronted the European man from the video. His name was Klaus. He smiled, thinking she was still the broken Jessica. He said, "The tattoo means you belong to us." She looked him dead in the eye and replied in fluent German, "It means you signed your own confession." Then she shot him in the knee, a move she remembered from a self-defense class she took in Berlin. The memory was crisp and it was hers. The police, the real ones not on the payroll, arrived in force, drawn by the viral data leak and the gunfire. The partners were arrested. Min-jun was arrested too for his part in the project and the years of unlawful confinement. As they cuffed him, he looked at Jae-yoon with something like peace. "The swan remembers," he said. She nodded. It was over. But here is the final, surprising detail. In the aftermath, as Jae-yoon reclaimed her life and testified, neurologists continued to study her case. The memory recovery was total, but they found a unique anomaly. The tattoo on her wrist, when scanned with a specific infrared frequency, revealed subdermal ink layers invisible to the naked eye. It wasn't just Min-jun's name in Korean. Hidden within the characters was a microprinted QR code, containing the encrypted coordinates of a secret server farm in Greenland where the raw, uncorrupted Project Mnemosony data was physically stored. Min-jun hadn't just branded her. He had made her the literal key, knowing her amnesiac body would be the one place his enemies would never think to look. The ultimate failsafe was on her skin all along. Jae-yoon Choi did not have the tattoo removed. She wears it as a reminder of what was taken and what was reclaimed. Min-jun Kang is serving a 15-year sentence, but he cooperated fully, and his testimony brought down a network that spanned 3 continents. The story closes not with a romance, but with a restored truth. The mystery of the maid with the tattoo was never about lost love. It was about a war for the human mind, fought on the battlefield of a single woman's memory. And in the end, she won. We now transition to the lasting impact of this case, and what it tells us about memory, identity, and the price of truth. So what does the story of Jessica and Jae-yoon Choi truly leave us with? Beyond the thriller plot of secret labs and corporate espionage lies a profound, unsettling question about the very nature of self. Her case forces us to confront a future where memory is not a sacred, immutable record, but a mutable file, one that can be edited, suppressed, or even stolen. Project Mnemosony wasn't science fiction. It was a logical, terrifying endpoint of our current trajectory in neurotechnology and data analytics. The battle wasn't fought with guns, but with ultrasound waves and amnesia-inducing drugs. The ultimate target wasn't a person's life, but her narrative. Jae-yoon's recovery is a medical marvel, but it's also a warning. The dissociative amnesia that framed her story is a real and devastating condition, often stemming from trauma the mind cannot process. Yet her case was perverted, weaponized by those who saw a flaw in human psychology as an opportunity for control. It reveals a chilling truth. The most powerful prison isn't made of walls, but of forgotten doors. When you don't know what you've lost, you can't even yearn for freedom. The lingering question isn't whether such technology exists, it does in nascent forms. The question is who gets to hold the keys. If your happiest memory, your deepest regret, or your witness testimony can be chemically dialed down or surgically removed, what remains of justice? What remains of love? What remains of you? Jae-yoon, tattoo, a visible mark hiding an invisible code, becomes the perfect metaphor for our age. The most important truths are often buried just beneath the surface, waiting for the right frequency of light to reveal them. Her story ends with a form of justice, but not a clean one. Min-jun is in prison, the consortium is dismantled, and she has her name back. But she also carries the irreversible knowledge of what was done to her, the visceral memory of being a ghost in her own life. There is no magical cure for that. Recovery in dissociative disorders is a long, often incomplete road, as the medical literature starkly confirms. She chose truth over peace, and that is a burden as much as it is a victory. This is why we follow these stories, not just for the mystery, but for the reflection. It forces us to look at our own minds, our own memories, and ask, how much of what I am is truly mine, and what would I fight to remember no matter the cost? If you believe that our memories are the bedrock of our humanity and worth protecting at all costs, then this channel is for you. We dive deep into the true stories where psychology, technology, and crime collide, exposing the fragile line between the mind we have and the mind we could lose. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story that makes you question everything you think you know. The next revelation is already waiting. Thank you for watching.